talking
So
pitching mechanics.
yeah, so like I have a video of deGrom that like all move through and you can like talk over or we can talk over just some like specific misses. So then I was gonna try to find some video of some of the JUCO guys. So I guess it is like kind of calling out the stuff that we don't like. One is Antoine. I have a video right here. Seeing Antoine doing like an active scap load, hip shoulder separation, and how like scap load should happen from hip shoulder separation.
That's what I was thinking of. Yeah, like the muscle activity is in response to like not being able to propagate energy.
Yeah, and then I have a back view of Hutch where he like loses posture really bad and not on his helical angle. Just I guess you just say they're not really like using their shape. They're
I was just gonna talk about like direction and like applying
okay.
force into the ground.
Okay, direction's a
That's
good
what I
one
was
with that.
thinking. The angles, right? Like how you can draw an imaginary line from one shoulder to the other shoulder, and then that's like the axes, or whatever, right? Like people
Yeah,
understand what axes are, right?
yeah, I think so. Yeah,
Um, or, yeah, like talking about spinning or like rolling, like a tire, right? Like if the tire is out of balance, then
yeah,
the direction of the roll is going to be out of alignment or whatever. Like the trunk is not spinning in the same direction as the pelvis, then you have wasted energy and inefficient spin on the baseball.
yeah.
So I mean that to me, that's what structure is like matching the pelvis and the rib cage rotational directions. And then you can talk about timing, where their center of masses in relation to their base of support. So you can talk about like posture breakdowns with that too, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
their center of mass is too far in front of their base of support, then they're going to collapse, or they're not going to create force into the ground at the right time. Hip to shoulder separation, I guess you could just talk about the disconnect between like timing and how, in my opinion, it's just a sequence of like the pelvis rotates faster than the trunk. So then there's a delay between when the trunk
Yeah.
starts to open up. And that's all, in my opinion, that's literally all hip to shoulder separation is. The trunk stays back just
Oh
long
yeah.
enough to get the connective tissues to store energy, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
we could talk about that, in my opinion, how like connective tissues store energy, muscles don't really to the same
Mm-hmm.
degree. Being too stiff versus like not being able to create stiffness at the
Mm-hmm.
right time.
A video we'll go over deGrom and we'll go through like the key points of a delivery, and I'll let you kind of lead that, and then
And then part three, I guess, could be like exercise selection,
yeah, the do's and the don'ts in the weight room for sure.
right? Because we have
Maybe
to talk about interference, in my
yeah, and
opinion.
maybe it's just easy as that. Maybe it's just like the do's and the don'ts, because then it's like we're talking about interference with like without going into all this in depth about compressing structure and creating concentric muscle orientation where you don't want it. Instead, it's just like literally, don't do this, don't do this. Let's use a Grom here. We'll go to like some key points like handbrake and leg lift. Like me, this is some of the most fantastic coaching mechanics that I've ever seen or will ever see. Just so awesome. Little change up too.
Yeah, I mean, the big thing that stands out to me when I watch guys like DeGrom is just the fluidity, like the tempo, the timing. It's a dance. Like it literally just looks like he's floating. And I talked to one of his old teammates actually, and the year. So what year was it where you had that massive spike in average velo? You went from like 93 to like 97 or whatever. I think
I
it was
was
like
pretty recent.
2000. You know that year I'm talking about, right? Like
Yeah.
he he was low to mid 90s, and then with one off season, his average velo jumped by like 3 or 4 miles an hour.
Yep.
And the story that I heard, and this was coming from one of his teammates, who used to like hang out in the outfield shagging fly balls with him. The only thing he thinks about, and this was really weird, I thought, but he pretends that the baseball is a Sharpie marker, and his only thought process is I want to get down the mound as smooth as I can and I want to draw the biggest figure eight as I can with the baseball, and that's it. Like that's his
Huh.
delivery. It's just draw figure eight, and he's doing it like one motion, like there's no pause.
Let's
And
watch.
that was when his velo spiked. So I thought that was interesting, just like
So
the
when you say
mindset change.
figure eight, you're talking about hand path.
I mean, technically, it's not just the hand path, but he's trying to get connected. I think is the goal is like that full body connection where everything's working as a unit, and if you watch his handbrake, like drawing out the path of the baseball, it's a figure eight, and it's one constant motion. So if you watch the baseball, like it never stops moving. Um, but see, like it's literally a figure eight. There's no straight line. The follow through is
Like
the
that.
second half of the figure eight.
Ball doesn't
So you
stop
think
moving.
that's the big one that I tell kids is like and I guess this goes into like muscle activity. Like a lot of gut times I see guys are like they're trying to muscle the baseball up into that arm slot.
Hmm.
But if you look at the timing of like when the arm actually gets up, it's almost like bouncing up into the position because of the ground forces from the back leg. In my opinion, like that's what brings the arm up. It's not like an active thing with your
So you're saying
shoulder.
it's back leg, back hip is what gets the arm up?
Well, if you watch like when he starts to go down the mound, his hands are still together, still together. He's breaking his hands as he's going down, and that's the moment that he's pushing into the ground. So if you think about like the forces that are going to go
Uh,
up to the baseball, that's where you can relax the arm, is because there's energy coming from the lower half, and then it's not forceful. Like you see the timing mechanism, it's like the hip goes first and then the arm starts to come up. But I see that backwards with a lot, especially like younger throwers,
yeah.
where they try and bring their arm up first. And so in my opinion, like a lot of times they're actually breaking their hands early, and it's throwing off the rhythm of the lower and upper half. But that's the big thing that stands out with the deGrom, just like on leg lift, he's starting to move down the mound, and he hasn't collapsed, so he still has his back knee in a good position. A lot of times
Uh-huh.
you'll see guys cave in with their backside, so that knee will internally rotate. And then a lot of times you'll see guys that have like that excessive side bend because they're not able to keep
Yeah, I mean
their pelvis level,
that's a big thing I
right?
see. The shoulders just look like he's just riding that slope. Oh, need to draw
And so
some
the
markers on
moment
there.
the moment the front foot lands, that's when you have to be in a position where you can actually produce force, and to get that arm through. That's the big thing that stands out is when he lands on his front foot. Everything's in a position where he can rotate
Boom.
fast, right? Like there's no wasted
Oh,
energy. His head doesn't even move. And you watch just like the contacts with the ground. His back. I mean,
I
I
mean
guess
that's
we could
close.
talk about center of mass. We could talk about his weight. When he goes down the mound, his center of mass stays within his base of support. So like his feet are what's supporting him off the ground, and you'll see like his guts. Like that's what we're talking about when we're talking about center of mass.
You can
The
actually
heaviest,
see them.
right? Like you can see the guts kind of slinging forward. But a lot of times in that position, you'll see the front leg totally collapse on impact. So you think about forces, like the ground is actually driving the speed, in my opinion. Like pitchers that use the ground more efficiently, they usually throw harder, and he's not tensing up his arm. His arm's totally relaxed. You can see it just by his head position. Like a lot of times,
Hmm.
guys will be throwing their head forward or bending to the side, kind of like trying to turn their head away.
We have a
And
good
I mean that goes.
example of that.
Why are they side bending? Why is their front foot coming up off the ground early? This is a good view because you can see where his center of mass is. So big thing that stands out is just it's not fluid.
Ball
Think about
stops.
when you're applying force. Yeah, like are you accelerating or are you decelerating? It just jumps. He just jumps down the mound.
Let's see where he's at a foot. Like he's late.
So that should be where his layback is, right? And
Yeah.
if you go
There,
back to
yeah, there
deGrom,
just
it's like,
literally is no layback.
so think about timing, right? Like if we want to drive more speed out of the trunk, you don't want the trunk to rotate first. You don't want it to rotate at the same time as the pelvis in order to get the maximum like storage and release of energy from the ground. You want the pelvis to rotate faster, and because the
Uh,
pelvis is connected to the rib cage, then you would want a delay in the trunk. So what I'm seeing right now is like there's no delay.
there's zero delay.
So the shoulders are rotating essentially at the same speed as the hips.
Yep.
But with deGrom, you can see a clear delay of when the pelvis reaches peak rotation, and the trunk still hasn't turned yet. It's still, and this is where we get into like scap loading and hip to shoulder separation. I think there's a lot of misconceptions about where these themes are coming from, or
We
just
can
like
look we can look at Antoine when he first came down, after being taught to actively try to scap load.
I think that's where the term like pushy arm action comes from,
Right there.
right? Like look where his elbows are, but look where his head,
That's foot
like
plant. That's damn
so
near foot
that's the
plant.
position that you're that landing onto the front leg, like that's where your arm is really vulnerable. Because when you're floating through space and you haven't landed on that front leg, there's there's not a lot of like forces that are going into the shoulder yet.
Yeah.
But when that front foot lands and you're trying to transition from maximal external rotation to maximal internal rotation, so going from layback to ball release, that's when there's like these massive amounts of torque and forces that are literally trying to separate your shoulder from the rest of your body, and to pull your arm apart. Literally, like
Yeah.
your arm is trying to get ripped apart when that front foot lands. And so that's where like deGrom is able to put way more force into the baseball because his trunk is in a position where his arm is close enough to his center of mass that he can actually spin his guts. I don't know if we're talking about guts still, but
Yeah, why
I
not?
think that's where the spin's coming from, right?
I mean, look, yeah, this is like,
And I
hey,
guess another,
that's why there's
yeah.
shoulder pain. That's why there's shoulder pain when he showed up.
So where did his arm hurt again? It was like the
He's,
bicep,
yeah, anterior shoulder pain. I mean,
and everything's just late.
that's where he was getting to. That was his layback.
So is it a mechanical issue?
Um, for him, yes, because I think for him it was the chicken came first, the mechanics came first and caused all of the tight muscles and like weird soreness and everything that he had when he showed up. Sorry about this. Yeah, because this is summer number one with him. This was last summer.
That's
Um,
just a lower velocity delivery too, right?
oh yeah, I mean, 76, 77 after being up to 88 in high school.
I see that a lot. I see it a lot with guys that like used to throw hard.
I think for him it was the coached into scap load, which caused and he's a powerful kid, he's fast, which and it caused so much muscle activity and tightness to happen around his shoulder. So it was like no chance he was gonna have for delivery. Just compounded to where like his scap started getting really tight. Then it probably put a little more stress on the anterior shoulder and the bicep, and because the teres minor was probably super tight. Just all that
Just do the
concentric
sleeper stretch.
orientation. Yeah. All that concentric orientation, I think, just caused him to just like compound worse, 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 worse over the months after. Like he started doing
So
that scap load.
you're talking about like scap loading is going to increase the amount of muscle activity on the back of your shoulder, right? Like that's what you mean by
I mean,
concentric. It's gonna be
yeah,
tight.
yeah, I think well, you have to scap load if you're getting proper hip shoulder separation, but like you and I have talked about it, it needs to be, I would just say it needs to be passive, or it needs to be like effortless scap load. It needs to happen from the connective tissues getting a stretch and getting put in positions based on what the pelvis and everything below it's doing. But I think it's,
Right? Like it's not just the scapula. I think that's
yeah, I
important.
think it's I want to say I've seen it started to. There's some baseball pitching coaches out here in the valley that coach it that I've heard of, but I think it's more of like a football thing. I
I've
think,
heard it coached a lot or just like
yeah,
talked about. I think there.
talked
I
about
mean,
talked
let's
about
just
one
talk.
thing because I talk about it and I like to talk about it with the advanced guys because it's a really easy example to talk to them about low effort efficient mechanics versus high effort, high concentric muscle orientation, very stiff pitching mechanics, which just won't work. So I like to use that because that's an easy example. Guys feel that right away. As soon as they get rid of actively scapulating, they get a little better hip shoulder separation with like a heavy weighted ball drill. It seems to kind of open up their mind. It's just an easy way to get a feel, link a visual or a thought process with a feel. And I think that's a pretty easy one to get. Honestly, with the scap load one, depending on the shape of the guy, I put them in a specific plyo ball drill, and I just give them a really heavy plyo ball because you are not going to feel an effortless throw if you have a heavy plyo ball in your hand and you're trying to actively scap load.
Right?
You're gonna make 2 or 3 throws, and it's either gonna hurt or your shoulder's gonna be on freaking fire.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it's something that. I guess this is where you're going to. Is it's passive. It's not active, and so we can talk about it. And I think we're all seeing the same things. Like there's some pretty good research on kinetics and kinematics of the pitching delivery, I would say.
Uh-huh.
But in my opinion, where the disconnect or like the just misunderstanding comes from is like, why is the scap load happening? Like, what does that mean in terms
Yeah.
of timing, forces being applied, shape changes, acceleration, deceleration? Like, why would we want a scap load? That's the term we're using.
Yeah.
What does that do?
Sure.
What does that do to the timing and getting more energy to the baseball
You tell me.
direct? Thinking of like what we were talking about with Hutch in terms of the delay and like the ERs,
Hmm.
because that's a position of like maximal horizontal abduction and external rotation. Like you're trying to create the maximum amount of space. I think about like distance. Like the more time you have to apply force and acceleration into the baseball, the harder you're going to throw. I think there's some research on that where they linked like horizontal abduction to higher velocities, but like I don't think it's because they literally have more horizontal abduction. I think it's the delay of the rib cage where they're able to separate. I mean, that's I think like hip shoulder separation where the pelvis has rotated and you're able to hold back
Hmm.
the thorax, the rib cage just long enough to get that stretch of the connective tissues. But if you have a lot of muscle activity, like for example, if you're actively trying to create the scap load
Hmm.
with your muscles,
Hmm.
you're too stiff. So energy slows down. Like you're slowing down the acceleration by, in my opinion, like by creating that squeeze and that tension in the
Hmm.
back.
Hmm.
We watch the hardest throwers. I go back to deGrom. There's very little tension, like in the whole body. There's only brief moments of time where they're actually applying the force with intent, and then most of the delivery is just relaxed. It's loose. It's smooth.
Hmm.
It's fluid. So that's where the scap load comes from, in my opinion. And we're seeing it, but I think we're misinterpreting what it is, why it's happening, and then we're just trying to coach it.
We're coaching it wrong.
We're just seeing the gross movement pattern, and we're not understanding the shape changes. We're not understanding what the connective tissues are doing. Like we could talk about the difference between yielding to forces and gravity versus like trying to overcome forces and gravity. So it talks about like stiffness and tissue pliability or whatever we're going to talk about, right? Like too much stiffness is going to create timing issues where the energy can't travel fast enough, and then now you're unsafe moving fast, so your body has to slow down.
You're unsafe moving fast,
right?
That's
what I see a lot is like your timing's off, and then now you land and all those forces are going up, but your arm's way back here and your trunk's moving forward. So in no way is that a position where you can move fast. And it's not about strength. It's not about mechanics at that point. Like it's literally timing where
the
energy that you were trying to transfer, it's gone. It moves so fast that like you didn't capture it in the right time, and then now you throw slow. It's the bottom line, right?
I like that. It's the same concept with hitters too. My big league hitters want as little attention as possible.
So many pitching coaches out there that probably understand a lot about pitching deliveries and mechanics. And I know of some good ones, but I think that when we apply the 4D model and just understanding how like we can't just look at a freeze frame and talk about what's
get
happening
to that position,
right? Like it's only one piece of the puzzle, in my opinion, to only look at mechanics, because we both know that like a lot of those guys relying on all that muscle activity because they need to. They're trying to create the shape change, but they can't.
Yeah, and then they'll never feel good again, to be honest, or the same. It's a tough field to try to mimic, is a high tension, high muscular rotational movement. It's a tough one. What else on that stuff? Just kind of a couple common things that we're seeing in terms of the scap load, fluidity, the motion. We talked about that the last couple of times. That's a tough one because I think we talked about that kind of off camera, but you have to have experience and have an eye to kind of really see it in a way, right? Or should you just
knowing what you're seeing?
Yeah, just knowing what you're seeing. I like that better. That's a better way to put it. Let's go back to deGrom and really get the definitions of some of these.
It's so in order to be fluid, and I think this is the lost art of the windup and why I still think windups are great for certain things. But you'll see like just the motion, say still body or whatever, and then in order to become fluid and smooth, you have to start slow, but you have to establish the right direction. So and you'll see it with guys windups, is like everyone's gonna step a little bit different. But I think it's what's setting the and Mike K talked about this. I think you're setting the table for the energy propagation. Like the direction of energy has to be established in your first move, in my opinion, where you see it like he steps back, but as he's stepping back, he's pivoting. He's not stopping, because if you stop the motion, then it's going to be a lot of wasted effort to get going again.
So you're saying he keeps it moving? He keeps the little steps
Look
going?
at the direction. Yeah, look at the direction. Like he's stepping back because he wants the guts to start moving. But if he just stops, then he has to start the motion again. So it has to be one continuous motion, and then you want to build momentum and get faster down the mound, because you watch the motion, like everything acceleration until the ball's out of his hands, and then he starts to slow down. But what I see a lot of times with guys, they start and then they stop and then they get going again. It's not acceleration. It's like a pause, whatever. But that's like the first thing that stands out with his windup, is just like the direction that he establishes, and hand break, like the moment he breaks his hands, I think that's when you see the center of mass starting to drop down. So you see like he's coming set, but he's drifting. So his center of mass moved down the mound and his hands break at the perfect time, like right as he's dropping down. That's going to create the momentum to bring the arm back up without tension. So he's riding the slope of the mound, and then he's using that ground force from the backside to bring the arm up. You see that, like as the back hip starts to rotate, that's what brings the arm up. But you see with lower velocity deliveries, like you see that disconnected, where it's like the arm comes up independently, and that's just because of muscle tension, in my opinion. Like right there, that's when he's going from maximal external rotation, right? Like he has horizontal abduction to the max, and then now he's applying the internal rotation, and he's using the lead leg block to push a fluid through the baseball. You could think about like he's a right-handed pitcher. You talk about the left side too, or like he's not. This is something I've seen coached. This is another misconception I think about what the glove size is doing. Like I've heard coaches telling guys to like rip their glove arm and to pull as fast. Like I've heard it.
This glove side back.
The glove side, yeah, they're trying to like rip the glove side to drive more arm speed, and I think that's one way to do it, but I think it's really inefficient. And again, like think about direction. I think you're pulling yourself away from the baseball with an aggressive arm side or glove
probably
side.
I'd assume that would cause like some like lazy sink or lazy, right? It'd be like you're just not, don't have good direction on the ball, and it's just, the ball is like you're gonna lose velo, and it's gonna fade, right?
Yeah, a lot of those like over pronators, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know, like the way I try and coach it is you want that glove side to stay pretty loose, and then there has to be enough space. There has to be enough space on your left side to like rotate into. So if you're pulling, in my opinion, like that's muscle squeezing, and that odds are like that's going to reduce the amount of space. So I see those guys and they're kind of like everything's spinning away. They don't hold on to their front foot for very long.
They spin out of their front side, and they maybe side bend or just
they side bend
or head spin.
It's like a twist through their neck to get pronation, in my opinion. So that's another big misconception. I think maybe it goes back to like the scap loading is they're squeezing their shoulders together to.
Sick. I like that. I think we've kind of defined as much as you can define, in my opinion, a pitching delivery, just because there's so many more variables that for each guy. But like main points of the delivery, like where you need to be, where should the arm be at front foot plant?
That's pretty universal. Yeah, you want. Yeah. I mean, I think about like resistance.
Drag,
like
maybe.
You have your
you can even call it like drag.
Drag, yeah. Like if your arms are way out here and you're trying to spin as fast as you can, like a helicopter, the arms are going to be like sails and they're going to slow you down. So that's the same concept I think about
so like
when your foot lands.
A hair inside 90.
It's like what Caleb used to teach, yeah, like inside 90, like not in here because that's also really inefficient.
Yeah, get in, get out.
But I think the biggest thing I see with guys that have arm injuries is that late arm when their front foot's landing and all their weight is on their front leg, but their arm is too far behind them that it's actually slowing them down.
They're using this connective tissue of their arm as a parachute to try to slow their body down the mound. That's not going to.
That's what it is. It's a parachute. Yeah, it's slowing you down. It's not I mean, your arm hurts. Your arm hurts when you throw that way, and then you also don't throw very hard. And so when I see guys that land like that, usually you'll see them decelerate through ball release, or they're actually creating a lot of speed down the mound, but they have to slow down. And so that in itself, that's when a lot of guys get hurt, is deceleration of the arm.
That's Antoine to a T, which it's so cool. It's so cool to see him actually having some speed and getting on top of the ball now.
And I think that's like a huge for not only injury prevention, but also just like velocity, where
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how strong you are, how much force you're able to produce. If you're slowing down, like what slows down a body in motion? How do you brake when you're moving fast, when you're sprinting? Like what's the brakes? It's not the
Uh,
bones, right?
no, it's gonna
Not the
be
ligaments and
it's gonna be
tendons.
connective tissues.
Um, so yeah, we talked about the arm injury pandemic, like probably not
You're
doing a good
supposed
job of
you're supposed to use your bone.
decelerating.
You're supposed to use your bones to accelerate and decelerate.
I mean, that's what I did. That's why that's why over half of my labrum's gone, and I have 12 anchors or eight. I think I have 8 anchors in my
Damn,
shoulder. Yeah, that was my strategy for many years.
that's crazy. Sick. Interesting. Good shit.